My cousin falsely accused me of assault to steal my $40,000 college fund. My parents exiled me to Iowa without proof. But 3 years later, she confessed before dying, and I exposed my entire family on Facebook. I'm 21 years old. I work at a distribution warehouse, making pretty good money for my age, and I just did something that my family says is going to ruin our reputation forever. But honestly, I don't care anymore, because they ruined my life 3 years ago when they decided to believe my cousin Morgan instead of me. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I still lived with my parents and had a college fund waiting for me and a family that I thought loved me, because all of that disappeared in a matter of days because of a lie that Morgan decided to tell to get money. I was 18 years old, just turned, had just graduated from high school, and was excited because I was going to start college in the fall. You know, I had everything planned out, my major, my classes. I had even already picked who I was going to share the dorm with. Morgan is my cousin, 4 years older than me, daughter of my uncle who is my mom's younger brother, and we had always had a normal cousin relationship, nothing extraordinary but not bad either. Like we'd see each other at family gatherings and that was it. Her dad had raised her alone because her mom abandoned them when Morgan was little, and my uncle had always been very generous with her, paid for everything, college, her apartment, her car, basically everything she needed or wanted. But that summer, Morgan and my uncle had a huge fight, one of those that you can hear from the street, because he told her that he wasn't going to keep paying for everything now that she had turned 18 and that she needed to start working and contributing. I mean, normal things that parents say, right? But Morgan got furious, said that he had promised to pay for all of college and that it wasn't fair that he was changing his mind now just because technically she was already an adult. The thing is that a few days after that fight, Morgan showed up at my house. She arrived around 6 in the evening, and my parents weren't there because they had gone to dinner with some friends. So Morgan and I stayed alone watching TV and talking about random stuff. Movies, music, I don't know, normal things. At some point, she started complaining about my uncle and how he didn't understand that she needed to concentrate on her studies and couldn't work full-time at the same time. And I told her what I thought, that millions of students work and study at the same time, that my uncle had no obligation to keep supporting her like she was a child, that basically she should do what everyone does and work to pay for her own expenses. Morgan got mad at me, told me I didn't understand anything because my parents were going to pay for my entire college, and that it was easy to talk when you didn't have to worry about money. She left the house around 9 at night, like upset but not hysterical or anything, just frustrated, I guess. The next day, my life was completely destroyed. Morgan called my parents and told them that I had sexually assaulted her the night before. That's why she had left the house crying, and that she had been so traumatized that she hadn't been able to say anything until now. My parents came home furious. My dad literally grabbed me by the arm and dragged me to the living room, while my mom cried and yelled at me, how could I have done that to my cousin? That she trusted she would be safe with me. What kind of monster was I? I didn't understand anything. I swore to them 1,000 times that absolutely nothing had happened, that Morgan and I had just watched TV and talked, that she had left upset because she didn't like what I told her about working. But that was it. They told me to stop lying, that they had checked the security cameras at the house. My dad had installed cameras outside a few months earlier because there were robberies in the neighborhood, and that you could clearly see Morgan leaving the house crying and wiping her eyes. I told them yes, that she had left upset because we had a disagreement about my uncle. But that didn't mean I had touched her or done anything inappropriate. They didn't believe me. Morgan was 4 years older than me. She was a woman. Why would she lie about something like that? My parents called my uncle, and there was a huge family meeting, where basically everyone took Morgan's side. She cried and trembled and said that I had cornered her when she tried to leave, that I had touched her breasts and tried to kiss her by force, and that when she managed to break free and run out, I yelled at her that no one would believe her because she was known for being dramatic. I kept denying everything, begged them to believe me, but every time I spoke, my uncle yelled at me to shut up, that I had already done enough damage. My mom wouldn't stop crying, and my dad looked at me with a mixture of disgust and disappointment that I'll never forget. He literally looked at me like I was trash on the street. That same night, my parents told me that my uncle wasn't going to press charges because he didn't want this to become public and ruin the family name, but that I had to pay the consequences of my actions. They told me they were going to give my college fund to Morgan as compensation for what I had done to her, and that I was going to go live with my great uncle in Iowa until I proved I could be a better person. I was 18 years old, just turned. Technically, I was an adult, so they couldn't legally force me to leave, but my dad told me very clearly that if I didn't accept this voluntarily, he was going to kick me out of the house without a penny and without any kind of support. Basically, they gave me a choice between going to Iowa with some money to start or staying on the street completely alone. What was I supposed to do? I agreed to go to Iowa. My great uncle is, and this is no exaggeration, one of the most horrible people I've ever met. He lives alone in a house that smells like mold and old cigarettes, has severe anger issues, and basically treated me like I was his personal servant. He yelled at me for everything. If I left a dirty dish, if I made noise after 8 at night, if I used too much water in the shower, anything was a reason for him to yell at me and tell me I was useless and that I should be grateful he was giving me shelter. My parents sent me money every month, like $300, but my great uncle would immediately take it, saying it was to pay for my rent and food. They let me use the internet and have my phone, but my parents made me delete all my social media, block all my friends, and basically cut all contact with my previous life. They told me this was part of my penance, that I needed to reflect on what I had done without distractions. I endured 2 months living with my great uncle before I found a job at a warehouse that was hiring. I had no experience in anything. I had barely finished high school, but they needed people for the night shift and basically hired anyone who could lift boxes. The work was hard, physically exhausting, loading and unloading trucks from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, but they paid $11 an hour, and for me that was a fortune, considering I had absolutely nothing. As soon as I got my first check, I left my great uncle's house without saying anything. I just grabbed my few things and left. 2 of my coworkers from the warehouse, guys in their early 20s who became my roommates and basically my brothers, told me I could stay with them in their apartment if I paid a third of the rent, like $250 a month, and I accepted immediately. The next 3 years were, I don't know how to describe them, like living in constant survival mode, but at the same time discovering that I could do things I never thought I could. I worked at that warehouse for a whole year, saving every penny I could, living basically on ramen and whatever my roommates cooked. Then I got a better job at another warehouse that paid $15 an hour, then another that paid $18. And finally, I ended up at a big distribution company where I now make $22 an hour plus productivity bonuses. It's not a fortune, but for someone 21 years old without a college degree, it's pretty good, honestly. My roommates taught me basic life, things that I didn't know because my parents had always done everything for me, like how to open a bank account, how to do taxes, how to cook something more elaborate than pasta with jarred sauce, how to negotiate with the landlord so he wouldn't raise our rent. They became my real family, the people who really supported me without judging me. Meanwhile, Morgan was wasting my money in the stupidest way possible. I found out through bits of information I got from distant cousins who didn't know the whole story, but basically Morgan didn't even use the money for college. She went traveling for a whole year, like Europe, Asia, Australia, posting Instagram photos of beaches and luxury hotels and expensive restaurants. After that, she bought an apartment that was completely beyond her financial means, bought herself a new car, designer clothes, basically lived like she was a millionaire, when in reality, she only had the money my parents had given her plus what her dad still occasionally gave her. She didn't work, didn't study, just lived on appearances and spending money that wasn't hers. About 6 months ago, I got an email from my uncle, Morgan's dad. I hadn't talked to anyone in my family for 3 years. My parents sent me messages from time to time, but I completely ignored them. I had blocked almost everyone because I didn't want to know anything about people who had betrayed me so easily. But this email from my uncle I read because the subject said, urgent, about Morgan and the truth, and something in me needed to know what it said. The email was long, and basically said that Morgan had been diagnosed with advanced stage pancreatic cancer, that the doctors gave her maybe 6 months to live, and that she had confessed that she lied about me. Everything, every word she said about that night, had been a complete lie. My uncle wrote that Morgan had confessed to him at the hospital, crying, that she made up the accusation because she was desperate to get money after he told her he wasn't going to keep paying for everything, and that when I told her she should work like everyone else, she realized she could use that against me. She knew my parents adored me and would do anything to protect the family, so she calculated that if she accused me of something horrible, my parents would give her money to keep everything quiet and avoid a scandal. And it worked perfectly. My uncle's email included an apology, like, "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry your life was ruined because of this. Morgan is very sorry and wants to talk to you before she dies." Basically wanting me to be the mature adult who forgave my dying cousin and gave her peace before she died. I read that email probably 50 times. Sitting in my room in the apartment I shared with my roommates, and I don't know what I felt exactly. You know? It was like a mixture of relief because finally someone was admitting that I had told the truth, and absolute fury because 3 years of my life, my college fund, my relationship with my family, everything had been destroyed by a calculated and selfish lie. 3 years living in survival mode, working exhausting night shifts, eating the cheapest possible food, not being able to go to college like I had planned, not being able to talk to my childhood friends, basically being treated like a criminal by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and all for what? Because Morgan wanted money to go traveling and buy herself nice things. I showed the email to my roommates that night, and they got furious on my behalf, like more angry than I was even. They told me I needed to do something with this information, that I couldn't just let Morgan die and everyone continue believing I was some kind of predator. One of them, Jake, told me something that stuck with me. If you don't do anything, if you let this lie continue to exist, then basically you're saying it's okay what they did to you. And he was right. You know what I mean? I couldn't just forgive and forget and move on like nothing had happened. This lie had defined my life for 3 years, had affected every decision I made, every relationship I couldn't form because I couldn't explain why I had disappeared from my hometown for no apparent reason. So I made a decision. I called my parents for the first time in 3 years. My mom answered, and when she heard my voice, she immediately started crying, saying my name over and over like she couldn't believe it was really me. I told her very calmly that I had received my uncle's email, that I knew Morgan had confessed, and that they needed to know something important. I was going to give them a week to decide how they wanted to handle this, as a family. But if in a week they hadn't done something to publicly clear my name, I was going to post the whole story on social media, with my uncle's email as proof, and with every detail of how they had treated me. My mom started begging me not to do that Morgan was dying, that it wasn't necessary to humiliate her publicly in her last months of life, that the family would never forgive us if I aired our dirty laundry that way. My dad got on the phone and basically ordered me not to say anything, that this was a private family matter and should be handled privately, that if I posted anything, I was going to ruin everyone's reputation, and that was selfish of me. Selfish? I was selfish? I told them they had a week and hung up. During that week, I received like 20 calls from my parents, from my uncle, from other relatives who suddenly remembered I existed, all begging me not to make this public, that we could talk about it privately, that we could find a solution. But none of those calls included a real apology from my parents. None of them acknowledged that what they did to me was wrong. None of them offered to return even part of my college fund that they gave to Morgan. They just wanted to protect the family image and make sure no one else found out they had ruined their own son's life by believing a liar. The week passed, and nothing happened, so I did what I said I would do. I created a long Facebook post telling the whole story, from the fight between Morgan and my uncle, to the night we spent watching TV, to the false accusation the next day, to how my parents exiled me to Iowa and took away my college fund to give it to her, to my uncle's recent email confessing that Morgan had lied the whole time. I included screenshots of the email, specific dates, details that anyone could verify. I ended the post saying, I was sharing this because I deserved for people to know the truth, that I had lost 3 years of my life being treated like a criminal for something I never did, and that if anyone wanted to judge me for making this public, go ahead. But I was no longer going to carry the shame for something I didn't do. I tagged my parents, my uncle, Morgan, all the relatives who had turned their backs on me 3 years earlier. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends from high school who didn't know why I had suddenly disappeared started commenting saying they couldn't believe what had happened, that they always knew I wasn't capable of doing something like that they were so sorry they weren't there for me. Cousins who had believed Morgan's story started apologizing, some in public comments, and others sending me private messages. People I barely knew shared my post, saying it was an example of how false accusations can destroy lives and that we need to believe victims, but also verify facts. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with notifications, messages, calls from people who wanted to reconnect with me or just tell me. They thought what they had done to me was horrible. My parents called me furious. My dad yelled at me that I had dishonored the family, that Morgan was devastated, and that this was probably going to accelerate her death from stress, that I was vengeful, and they would never forgive me for doing this. My mom was crying in the background, saying, "How could I be so cruel to my dying cousin?" I told them that they were cruel to me when they kicked me out of the house without even investigating whether what Morgan was saying was true, that they were cruel when they gave my future to someone who just wanted money to go partying, that they were cruel every day for 3 years, that they didn't bother to ask me how I was or if I needed help. I told them they were no longer my parents, that the people who raised me had died the day they decided a manipulative cousin was more important than their own son, and that I didn't want to hear from them ever again. I blocked them on everything and haven't talked to them since. Morgan died about 2 months after I posted everything. I didn't go to the funeral, obviously, but I found out from a cousin who did attend. Apparently not many people went. Most of the extended family had cut her off completely after finding out what she did, and my uncle basically had to organize everything alone because my parents didn't even help him much. That same cousin told me that during the funeral my uncle gave a speech where he publicly admitted that Morgan had made a terrible mistake that ruined my life, and that he felt he had failed as a father by not teaching her better values. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse, honestly. Last week I did something I never thought I'd do again. I went back to my hometown. My 2 roommates, Jake and Marcus, convinced me to go, said I needed to properly close that chapter and reconnect with the people who had really supported me after everything came to light. We drove like 5 hours there and stayed at a cheap hotel near downtown. I saw some of my friends from high school who had been constantly messaging me since I posted the story, and it was weird but good, you know? Like coming home, but to a different version of home. One where I was the victim who had been vindicated instead of the villain who had fled. Some of my uncles and cousins also wanted to see me, people who had completely cut contact with my parents for what they did to me, and it was comforting to know there were people in my family who had taken my side, even when it meant fighting with my parents. We drove by my old house just to see it from outside. My parents weren't there. Apparently they had left town for a few days. Maybe they knew I was going to be around and didn't want to run into me. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The walls needed paint, and the yard was neglected, like my parents had stopped caring about keeping up appearances. Jake put his hand on my shoulder and asked me if I regretted anything, leaving, posting the story, anything. I told him no, that the only thing I regretted was not defending myself harder from the beginning, not fighting more when they falsely accused me, but that with the age I was and the situation I was in, there probably wasn't much more I could have done. Marcus said something that made me laugh. He said I was probably the strongest person he knew for having survived all this and built a decent life from scratch, and that my parents were idiots for not realizing that. Now I'm 21 years old, I still work at the warehouse, but I'm saving up to eventually go to college, maybe in a year or 2 when I have enough money saved. I live with my roommates who are more my brothers than any blood relatives I have. I have a group of friends who met me after all the drama and who accept me completely. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that finally, people know the truth. My family, or what's left of it, basically split in 2. Those who support me and cut contact with my parents, and those who still think I went too far by making everything public. Honestly, I don't care anymore what that second group thinks, because I learned the hardest way possible that people who really love you, believe you, and support you, even when things get complicated, and people who only care about appearances will betray you the moment protecting you becomes inconvenient. I guess in the end this taught me who's really worth it in my life, though it was an extremely expensive and painful lesson to learn.